Star Wars lads. For our first stream in a couple weeks, we took a week off, but we're back here to talk about all of the latest big news that we knew would be coming out of D23. If you want to check out our reaction video to the Skeleton Crew trailer specifically and some of the breakdown of Andor and Mandalorian's trailers that weren't released to the public, you can check that out over on that video on the channel. But we're going to try to do our best to do kind of the same thing here for those of you who still want to talk about these trailers as well as some of the other future stuff that's coming out with Star Wars. And then, as always, we're going to answer your guys' questions, give you guys a chance to ask us anything you want. It doesn't have to be about Star Wars. It can be about Star Wars if you'd like. It could be about any other topics that you'd like to discuss. Very few things are off limits on these Ask Us Anything. So make sure you send in your chats to the chat. It is first come, first serve, so we'll try to get through everything after we get through our topics. If we don't get through everything, unfortunately, that might be how it is. It is only an hour and a half long show, but you can guarantee you get a question or a comment on the stream today by sending in a super chat. Helps out the channel tremendously. Your support really helps carry us through, especially these times with less Star Wars content and less things going on to talk about. So we greatly appreciate any and all support, and you will get your question bumped up to the top if you do send that in. But of course, completely optional and up to you, and we always appreciate your support. Check out our YouTube membership programs or Patreon programs. They're the same on both. You can pick which platform is right for you. We do have some members in the chat today, so we appreciate your support. And we're going to be working even harder on trying to get you guys all the good stuff that are available for perks up on our membership programs. So keep an eye on that, as well as more videos coming out here soon. We do still have shorts coming out every other day and polls coming out every day talking about our favorite Star Wars characters. So a lot going on the channel, even though it's been a little bit of a slower week for us. We've both been kind of finishing up summer stuff, and now we're back in the swing of things as summer is ending and getting back into making the channel, functional again. More and more content coming out here. So hopefully you guys enjoy all of that. So without further ado, let's just get into the first topic, which of course is going to be Skeleton Crew. Skeleton Crew finally got its first official trailer released to the public. We finally got to see what this show kind of is and what it's about and the tone and the vibe. Sanak, what did you think of that Skeleton Crew trailer?
Yeah, I thought it was surprisingly pretty refreshing. I think the only thing I really had going for me was that, okay, I've heard rumors that this is going to be like a very alien heavy show. The budget for that is going to be really obvious once you see it on screen. But besides that, and maybe some of the Amblin vibe, I was like, okay, like wait and see, sort of. Now I'm getting excited for this, right? I think, you know, I'd say since the Obi-Wan era, since Book of Boba Fett, shows have slowly improved visually again. They've kind of gone back to where they were in 19 and 20 before COVID really disrupted the CGI departments and VFX crews all throughout Hollywood, plus all the strikes and everything. It does feel like this is a product that has had an extra year to gestate for us. It was supposed to come out end of last year. Now it's scheduled for a winter release, December 3rd. And yeah, it looked pretty fun. I mean, I will say when they said Amblin, I didn't expect quite literally to see 80 suburbs, but in Star Wars with like someone walking a Nexu or something of that sort, or maybe like a Corellian hound. But it was nice. I mean, that's the only thing that really took me out of it. But it kind of does make sense because I'd hope in a galaxy far, far away they're a lot better about city planning and all that. But these are this is what the beautiful thing about Star Wars is. Like there's so many new planets, so many new places to explore, and one of the things we've never really explored as a concept is what is life like for just like a middle class kid, just like on a new frontier planet that's like getting a lot of development, but isn't like a Coruscant or a Corellia where it's like stuck in a metropolis. And then how are people who are maybe former members of the rebellion or part of the rebellion structure settling on these planets that are far removed from having cantinas and scum and villainy and dirt and deserts and just huge amount of land in between. different like sites for where people are living and effectively grouping together. So that was the only thing that like took me off there. And I thought it was pretty nice to see like they also had like these rails underneath each car, so it's almost like they're organizing traffic on some of these suburbs and these planets, which I was like, okay, like this is going to be like a very structured place to live. It almost feels like it's been designed this way. Maybe that will be part of the concept, that this is like a new republic opportunity. This is where these parents and have taken their children to really start new families, to really start fresh, going back to the values of the old republic now and all that. So it makes sense that a kid who's heard about these adventures, who knows that they're only like a few years since the galaxy was under the Empire, now is hearing about the Jedi once more publicly, like they would be excited, right? So I like seeing all those little things. Obviously, they stumbled into the ship, but yeah, I mean, visually, just looks really great. It looks really fun. It looks like it's going to be like almost got like a vibe of a holiday classic in the making. Just something you want to throw on every December, just because it's fun for everybody. Um, and then yeah, Jude Law's character, John Nanawood, right? That was pretty interesting to see him use the Force. I'd almost hope that he doesn't become like an ex-Jedi from Order 66. I kinda hope it's just someone who's like, "I found out, like, a few years into the Empire that I could use the Force, but no one ever came to find me, and so I've just been using it for my own whimsy or for, maybe a little bit more of his, like, parlor tricks or things of that nature that gets him tied up with these pirates, gets him into this little jail cell that we see him at the end there. And that's very different from what I think we were all expecting of him being kind of like this teacher of sorts or like some adult guide for these kids. Maybe that's what he becomes throughout the show. But yeah, I mean, it looked really fun. The kid's little hover bike, great. Like all the details are really there. I'm very sure that this is just going to be a one and done sort of show. But after seeing how nice it looks, I'm actually really fine with that. I think this can be a nice, fun adventure that can like open up different avenues for the movies that are coming out in this era, for the rest of the shows and their continuing stories there, but can still mostly just be its own thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I hope it does stick to its own lane because I think it will be much better for it. The show is certainly one that needs to go for a particular vibe and a particular feel and tone and look, and I think the less you get bogged down with the rest of this multimedia initiative that's going to be pushing into the finale of these Mandalorian films and Ahsoka and all of that, really the better you'll have for possible future stories. Because I think this show, if it succeeds, it will get a season two, especially with how young the actors are, probably how cheap the actors are, how really the budget is going to the effects and the grandeur of the spectacle in this show, less so towards the talent. So if people do fall in love with these characters, if people do fall in love with this style of storytelling, I think you absolutely will see a season two, but it can stay with its own thing. Maybe Mandalorian pops up for an episode. I think more of that cameo vibe would fit this show rather than it actually becoming important to the overall narrative.
Right.
Because it really shouldn't. I mean, it should be a fun show about kids in Star Wars. And really, this is kind of the first time we've seen this tone and this style since George Lucas was involved with Star Wars and really since like the Ewoks movies. Like this is a higher budget version of that with much better actors and much better story. And so I'm already pretty certain of that over the Ewoks movies. And I think there's a lot to love about that direction. And it's a direction that, like I've said many times, I wasn't really that excited for. It sounded fun. Okay, this is interesting. Maybe if Steven Spielberg's name or something was on it, we could get fully hyped about, okay, what is this, in the Star Wars world? But something Spielberg-esque that wasn't it didn't have anything to do with him. It felt like they were just kinda trying to copy trends, and now having seen it, it's not that they're still not necessarily copying the trends, but it looks like they're doing a good job of copying those trends. So, hopefully, it is very Star Warsy in its depictions of those typical kind of genre tropes, and I think going with a Goonies vibe a bit more than more traditional 80s kids films, I think works perfectly. This should be an adventure film. This should be kind of a mystery discovery film, I mean, show. So I think that's a great direction to go. I'm pretty excited from what I've seen, especially visually. Like you mentioned, Sonic, this show looks really, really good. All the visuals look good. I love an emphasis on aliens. I love an emphasis on prosthetics and animatronic masks, and of course the CGI stuff looks really good too. So overall, I think this is a show to now certainly get excited for, not to go on the Acolyte again, because I know you guys are probably tired of us talking about the Acolyte, but I think based on post Acolyte, how I felt about Star Wars recently and the direction it's going, like this is a fun palate cleanser. And at the very least, if it's even like a 7 out of 10, I think it's going to be a pretty beloved piece of Star Wars entertainment. We've talked a lot about on this channel about how a lot of the best things for Star Wars in the Disney Plus era have been the stuff with zero expectations, right? It was Mandalorian, nobody knew what it was, nobody knew what to expect. It blew up. Andor, nobody really thought a show about Cassian Andor, how great can that be? It's just going to be another little spin-off show. And then it turned into what it is, a dark spy espionage war series about the rebellion, a different side than we've ever seen in live action film. And I think Skeleton Crew is perfectly set up to be that. It's an unassuming project. It's one nobody really has expectations for. It's one nobody really cares if it's great or bad. And so I think as long as it's good to like really good, I think it's going to find its own following. And I do think that will probably help it get a season two, but we'll see how people jump on. If it's just mediocre or kind of below average, then I don't think this is going to really help Star Wars in any way at all. It's a show that doesn't really seem to have much excitement outside of this one trailer for it. So hopefully we get to see even more great stuff. Hopefully the marketing's really good, and hopefully those first couple episodes are awesome. And we get to talk about how Skeleton Crew is now one of the saviors of the future direction of this universe. So I can't wait to see how this all turns out, and I'm very excited for Skeleton Crew now. But next, let's turn to Andor season two, because Andor season two did get a behind the scenes package that wasn't released to the general public, but we do have notes from the leaked versions and the people's notes who were there and saw it. Let's talk about season two. Senek, you have a bit more of the breakdown for that. What were your thoughts on Andor season two's package that they showed? And how excited are you now, having seen this, for hopefully an early 2025 release for Andor season two?
Yeah, early 2025. That is the hope, right? Like I'm not really sure how this is going to fit in, especially with almost like a little bit of a mini MCU bump slash revival, especially being kind of led forward with Daredevil on Disney Plus. I wonder
Yeah,
if that's going to have the priority over Andor season two, which I mean, in for most other shows, I would say no, but Daredevil is pretty beloved. It is pretty well acclaimed. Um, all the things I've heard out of the changes that had come up with the Loki showrunners kind of taking over and the actors being brought back, making it fully connected to the MCU. They've got a lot of hype behind it, and I think Disney's aware of that. Whereas Andor, it's beloved, it's critically acclaimed, but it still is a show that statistically not a lot of people watched. It's taken years for people to kind of come to this point of like, oh my god, that is the best thing ever because now we finally talked about it, right? And yeah, yeah, it's like, all right, well, that's true, but we need to finish off the story. That's the whole point of season two, to kind of condense 4 years instead of the 1 year that we really focused on in season one. But what I saw out of it, I think it's got me pretty excited. And it's ironic to say this, but Tony Gilroy, and I'm seeing something in the chat about Andor didn't feel like Star Wars necessarily because, or some people didn't feel like it was Star Wars because there weren't really cameos and all that. I do think season two is going to have more. I mean, we already know Saw Gerrera is going to be back. In the leaked trailer, we do see Ben Mendelsohn come back as Orson Krennic. And I know, Liam, you're a big fan of the Catalyst novel, so I'm very
yeah.
curious to see if this will almost work like how the Dooku depictions have been in canon, where they kind of still overlap and flesh out the little gaps in between pre-existing story and all that, especially if Krennic's role is more for that final year of episodes. And it's exciting to have this belief that we're going to see a little bit more and more cameos. I saw some notable Star Wars accounts point out that Roken Chip from Obi-Wan Kenobi appears at Yavin, right? And it's the only ship design that we've seen of it, all right? Like there isn't any other versions. Yeah, no, like it looks like we could be ironically through Tony Gilroy, through a guy who's not like such a huge fan of Star Wars, end up being a character who a figure in the Star Wars that we have today that's actually connecting all of these different rebel cells and stories that we've been able to really see from before Disney and through especially a lot of the early Disney canon. So yeah, we know Krennic's back. We know Saw Gerrera's back. We know Matma is going to have a huge focus here, right? Like a lot of like the shots, especially the establishing shots in the trailer, I do feel like it's centered around Coruscant behind the Senate building. We've never really seen the behind of the Senate building, and here they're using some real life locations from like Valencia in Spain, I believe. There's like a nice pool and some nice white structures. It does seem like Mon Mothma's story is going to start a little disconnected, like we saw in season one, but then bridge into where we see her in Rebels and when she's boarding the Ghost Cruise ship, right? So I'm very very curious to see if we'll at least see like a cameo of like their jumpsuits or something like that, like as she's boarding onto their ship, and that's where her story takes off, like closes off here in Andor season two, and when she's like more fully ingrained with the greater rebellion stories that have already been established, more established with what's going on with Luth and Rail, what's going on with Saw Gerrera. So I'm very excited for her to be a little less isolated and kind of come more fully in orbit of Andor's story. I, we know that we're going to get K2SO back. We saw Alan Tudyk, talk about it, and he's pretty hyped. Gave a little bit of an interview in that little BTS trailer. So I'm very curious if they're gonna use the basis of the Rogue One tie-in comic that has K2SO's origin, if they're gonna use that, or if they're gonna go a totally different direction, maybe go with that fan theory that they might take the data from Cassian's droid and then maybe upload it into this K2SO model because we see like 6 or 7 of these K2 models walking around in the trailer. If maybe that's how he like creates this really strange personality that has become so iconic in early Disney canon, especially. I think that's a great way to take the basis of the story, but expand it further. I love for Tony Gilroy to not just do what Filoni does, where it's just like I'm gonna rewrite things, but maybe let's expand it. Let's add more detail. Let's make that still a fun thing to read in its medium. But this is what is like almost more of a fleshed out version. Uh, yeah, I mean, it all looks great. It is mostly BTS, so it's not really story driven. It's not really narrative driven. So we're not really seeing why Bix is in the trailer so much. We're not really seeing what Cassian is doing. We're seeing him in a bunch of different outfits, and you're like, okay, a lot more espionage, maybe a lot more undercover deception stuff. But we also know he's been shooting a lot of scenes with Genevieve O'Reilly, with Mon Mothma, and all that. So yeah, no, I'm really really curious what exactly the season's narrative is going to be, with each 3 episodes being a year covered. Is it just a story per year, or is it like they're trying to generally get the understanding of like all the major events of the individual years leading up to it? I'm not really sure how the show will handle it, but I'm excited nonetheless. I mean, the budget looks fantastic. There was a shot of like a new TIE fighter. It looks like an interceptor, but almost more like a TIE dagger from EU, which, you know, I'm more excited to see Imperial buildup. Like we've seen so much of that in Rogue One, but we never really saw like what the Empire was doing as the Death Star is really coming into full fruition and full power. So if Krennic is the one to bring us into that forefront, I'd love that too. But yeah, definitely rich BTS, not so much narrative heavy, but there's enough hints there that have gotten me really excited.
I agree in almost every way. It's a show that I don't think needs much to get its fan base hyped. We're already excited for season 2. And this show, what they showed here, I think was a little bit of an indication on the variety that we're going to see. Like you mentioned, there's so many different outfits for Cassian. You would assume that each kind of arc is a different story because he is truly a spy in Rogue One, and I think we're going to start to see how he becomes and takes on that role, how he perfects that role. He's kind of indicated to be the rebellion's top spy at that point, and he's given a mission of vital importance at the beginning of Rogue One. And ultimately, I think we're going to see how he gets there. And I am more excited for the Cassian stuff here. Some could argue that Cassian is one of the less exciting characters of Andor season 1. There are a lot of movement. There's a lot of movement for other characters, and goes on his journey and slowly learns from each encounter that he has with these other people. But he's the one that doesn't necessarily get the push that you would expect an Andor show to get. He is definitely sharing time with the magnetic performances of a lot of other great actors and a lot of great characters. And so I'm excited for this to possibly just have Cassian take the reins, just make him the main character, and every single arc really centers around and hinges on things he's doing for the other players that we set up throughout season 1 of Andor. I would really like to see that, and I think we're going to start to see it. When you add a K2 and stuff, K2, of course, part of the comedic side of Rogue One, which is a darker story, but does have its levity. And I think this show, as it goes on, is going to start to get a little bit more light. Not that there won't be darkness, but you already see in this package too. You see a lot of bright colors. There are a lot more bright colors than you see in the original Andor. There's reds. There's a bright outdoor light day shots. There's not as much doom and gloom. And I think as the show goes on, not that there won't be dark twists and turns, and not that there won't be that same violence and vitriol that we see from characters in season 1, because I think there are still ruthless characters in the show, Cassian amongst them. He is ruthless up until he doesn't kill Galen Erso in Rogue One. But I think you're going to start to see a little bit of that change, that shift into the more lighthearted nature of the original trilogy. You're going to start to see that slowly build. And I think that's an interesting choice as well. Hopefully everything starts to build into each segment of of the arcs, like back to back. There's a flow, because I think it's cool to go with an arc show, and we've seen arc shows obviously like Clone Wars be awesome. But how does that work as a season 2 when your first season wasn't really an arc-based show? How does that work in a season 2 when you have so many sets of characters that needs wrap up? How does that work in a season 2 when you know the end game of where a lot of these characters end up? So I think changing the style completely is a big risk, and hopefully there's at least some narrative flow and narrative build in between each arc, so that every arc feels rewarding. Every time we watch something, we feel like we have a new grasp on Cassian Andor as a person, and especially on these other characters who we can assume probably die or have some different purpose in Rogue One, because we don't have a Luthen Rail in Rogue One. We don't have a Bix in Rogue One. So what's going to happen to these characters, and how do we phase them out of Cassian's story? That's going to be an exciting part, and I can't wait to see what they do here. I mean, we're already it's hard to not be confident in the storytelling at the very least. It's about the structure that I'm more interested in seeing how they handle this different change of structure. But they've known they're doing this since the beginning. It's not like they just came up with this. This was something they've known they were doing since like 2019 when they start announced this show. So we'll see how they pull it off. They've had a long time to come up with answers, and I can't wait to see what they do. But yeah, back to kind of that first part I said as well, the release date. And I think Daredevil is a big red flag for the release date of Andor. We kind of assumed it would be early 25, because originally it was supposed to come out at the end of 2024.
Right.
Well, now with Daredevil, which was originally announced, I don't know if they said anything about it at D23, but it was originally announced to be an 18 episode season 1. So unless they break that up into two halves, or it's not 18 episodes anymore,
I think it's
even
9 episode, like, seasons, but, like, it's a part 1, part 2 sorta deal now.
so it's a
Yeah,
9
so
episodes.
I think it's 9 dropping March-ish. I think that's my understanding.
Okay. Because yeah, that's the only way we don't get Andor. That's the only way we get Andor before the summer, or by the summer of next year. Otherwise, and I've been saying this for a long time, I do really kind of see that September release date again. Like I just think with a show like Andor, where it's a show that has a bit more niche audience, it's a show that has built its reputation over time by its high quality. I could see them saying, "Hey, let's just not risk having a ratings drop for this. We know it's a bankable, strong series. Let's put it in the same release date that we had last time, end of September, October, and November. Let's do it the exact same way, and we'll release the first 3 episodes because that's a whole arc at first, and then people kind of get a feel for how the show is going, and then hopefully it carries into the end of the year and gives us a strong end of the year. I wouldn't mind that. It just sucks because, we know this is our next big live action show. We can assume Skeleton Crew is over probably by mid-January if they do the same Acolyte release strategy, because we know it's
Right.
8 episodes. So if it's the same Acolyte release strategy and they do 2 on the first day, then it's over in 7 weeks. At best, it's 8 weeks long, right? So we know it'll be over by mid-January, mid to end of January. So it would suck though if we had to wait from the end of January all the way until September to get our next big live action Star Wars show. Maybe not the worst thing in the world, but yeah, that's one of the concerns I did have out of D23 with the Daredevil stuff, because I'm very excited for Daredevil. I've really loved that show in the past, and I can't wait to see what they bring. But yeah, there's a big glaring red flag there for the release date of Andor season 2. But let's talk about the next thing, which is the Mandalorian and Grogu trailer for the next Star Wars live action film that is coming to theaters. The Mandalorian and Grogu is probably going to kick off a huge set of Star Wars films in theaters that are going to, push forward this Mandalorian universe into theatrical releases, which, as long as money willing and the audience showing up, they will probably move it to theatrical product. But Sonic, you saw the leaked version of this trailer. What did you think of it?
They're really trying to lean on the emotions of this bond that Din Djarin and Din Grogu have, right? It is a relationship that they kind of really start off the trailer with a couple of shots from season 1 and season 2 and season 3, and then it just gives us a good like 10, 15 seconds. I mean, they just started. There is not that much. And this is like one of those trailers I don't take like fully at face value, because it has some things that I'm like, yeah, that looks really cool. But then I think about it more, and then I see that some other content creators like Eckhart's Ladder, and I'm like, yeah, you know what? Maybe there are some things that aren't definitive right now, right? We know for a fact that we're gonna get Zeb in this film, right? It was strange to have him only in Mando season 3 as a little cameo. It is a very common thing that Lucasfilm does over like, working with the asset, kind of putting it into a show and its budget, and then maybe reworking it and reusing it and making it a little bit better by the time they want to actually use it as like a full-fledged thing. And I mean, he looked great there, but now it seems like they're like, okay, we want to use him. I wish he cameoed at least for like 5 seconds in the end of Ahsoka, so he could have had like a, instead of like Hera. If you want to preserve the Hera and Ezra just kind of being like, oh, I'm home, right? And have them still apart, you could still have Zeb just run up and grab the kid, be like, "Oh my god, you're here," right? Like that, I think that could still work, right? But I mean, that doesn't happen, right? That is again all my wishful thinking. What we have here is that we have Zeb piloting a Razor Crest with Din Djarin. We get to see some shots of him and a bunch of snowtroopers, a little like rugged mouse droid POV shot where he's like fighting off all these snowtroopers. It is on a snowy planet. Whatever we see is on a snowy planet, outside of maybe the first shot where we see him like kill 4 guys that are at this big table. We see an ATRT like the ones that were used on Felucia and all these other planets in Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. And him and Grogu, they're like riding down the snowy planet, and then it appears in front of them that and like stumble down this cliff that has AT-ATs right in front of them, right? So, and that's where it ends. That there really isn't much there. It's maybe 10 seconds of new footage. That's really how you have to look at it. But I think it's a good little tease to get people back to the vibes of season 1 and 2. It doesn't seem like this is a film that's gonna have major plot in of itself. It's almost like a setup for what's gonna come next. It's gonna be one of those things that really builds off the threads of season three's ending of like, hey, I'm selective about my missions. I'm gonna do these things for the New Republic with the deal that I've kind of made with Carson Teva. And in that deal, I'm gonna have certain protections, certain clientele that I'm gonna work with, and we've all speculated like the best way to continue in Mando season 4 or whatever is gonna come next is that he's gonna be dealing with Imperials and the Shadow Council and whatever's been set up from Mandalorian, from Ahsoka, right? Maybe whatever is slightly connected to Skeleton Crew, if there is any Imperial activities that we see in that show. I would not put it past that show to at least give us like a little tease of like them working with the underworld or something, right? I think we're gonna deal with like the first real push in the Outer Rim of these Shadow Council, groups and Thrawn's influence. I'd love to see what the snowy planet is. Some people are in the chat are saying Ilum. I think that'd be pretty good, especially if you're a fan of the Jedi games, right? Fallen Order had Ilum. We know it turns into Star Killer base one day. It'd be nice to revisit it and see what the Imperials are kinda trying to do with the planet in between what we see in Jedi Fallen Order and before it becomes a full-fledged base and super weapon. That could be a pretty solid opportunity. But I think the thing I really want to focus on is that Razor Crest. I don't think that Razor Crest is actually a ship that they're gonna fly. If they do, then I'm like, okay, now what are we doing with the N1? Do we really need to have a Razor Crest as a replacement if we want a freighter ship? There's so many unique designs you can go with. Is it even Din Djarin's? Is this somehow just a ship that Zeb has and maybe by the end it's just like loaned over to Mando? Is that what they're trying to do? And it brings me to the question of like how much are they trying to revert back to season one and season two? Because let's be frank, like even though I enjoy season three, I know Liam does not like it as much, and I know a lot of other people don't like it as much as the first two seasons. I still blame a lot of that on making a lot of key story be done and Grogu's return be done in the Book of Boba Fett that absolutely hampered this season. Uh, but then the question remains, okay, are we going to try to get back to the full aesthetics of season one and two? Are we going to go back to almost like the looseness, the episodic nature of it? Is this just going to be a film that's like a high budget version of like the season two premiere with, the Crate Dragon, especially since that is an episode that Favreau directed? From what we've seen, I don't think so. I still think there's like some like narrative movement. There's different locations and variety in its action to tell me like, okay, we're gonna do something pretty interesting with the Imperials. But I do wonder how much is like, or are we gonna roll back from season three? I feel like the best thing to do if you're gonna start off with that narrative thread of that is at the very end of season three is to flesh out the weaker parts of season three, build that a little bit more Mandalore lore with this bond that these two have. If they're gonna be apprentice and father son, make that a lot more clear instead of just having Grogu around like he was in season three. He looks like he's doing some things here. He's crawling around. There's a shot of him with the two Anzellans from the supposedly from the season three, right? So I think this film is going to push a lot of the final parts of season three forward, but I still think that the show transitioning into a film franchise potentially, it has to still respect a lot of what we saw and make us care about those things and make us, if you haven't caught up on season 3, kinda go back to those things and then make it a little bit better, right? You have to make us understand why exactly Grogu came back in Book of Boba Fett. We maybe give us Boba back, and if he's gotta dump exposition, sure, do it, but if you're gonna change things to where they were in season 2, if you're gonna change Boba, if you're gonna change Din Djarin, you're gonna do all these other things, fine, do that. We actually enjoy that more, but still advance the threads that were really fulfilling and actually had some narrative momentum behind them at the end of season 3. And if it means that the Razor Crest is gonna be back, I hope it's just a placeholder. I hope it's like a totally different ship. Maybe it's the Ghost or something, they just didn't have the model ready or something, or maybe it's like another ship. Just make it, like, new and fresh and worth being a movie that we're sitting in theaters for, that it's worthwhile that we saw the first 3 seasons, but it shouldn't just be like, "Oh, that was, like, an extended version of it."
Right. I think for this film, especially touching on your comment, the Chris, about do you guys think Mandalorian and Grogu should be only Mandalorian viewer friendly or completionist friendly like the Ahsoka series was? I really think making it a massive completionist project is a financial mistake. And I think that's not the direction they're going. I think this is bare bones Mandalorian, what most people know of the Mandalorian, because I think right now, Mandalorian season 1 and 2 has been viewed probably as much or close to as much as maybe Rise of Skywalker level. Like maybe not as much as Force Awakens, Rogue One, Last Jedi, beginning of Disney era Star Wars, but it has a massive following. And when most people think of The Mandalorian, they think of those two characters. They think of those two characters in their episodic adventures that you see in seasons 1 and 2, just doing a bunch of random missions that ultimately lead towards a common goal. Now, when you structure a film, you obviously can't structure it like that. If you have the film feel like it's like 12 acts and each act is like a little separate mission, I think it's going to feel completely disjointed and weird. So I hope they don't structure the film like that. But what I think you're going to get is basically one of those arcs just stretched out to be an hour and a half or probably 2 hours. And that will include a lot of cameos. I'm thinking it's not going to be a completionist thing where you kind of had to have watched Rebels to at least understand who some of these characters are. I still contend that for Ahsoka, you don't necessarily have to have seen Rebels, but it does absolutely help
Yeah.
if you have, because so many of the characters existed before and they reference so many things from the past that really I can understand that point of view. But there will be cameos like Zeb. There will be cameos like Bo Katan. I'd be shocked if she's not in it at some point. There might be a big Mandalorian armada that helps out, kind of a bigger version of what you see at the end of season 3. There will be cameos from other Imperials, maybe a Thrawn cameo. I would be shocked if Thrawn's not in it in some capacity, if he is indeed where they're placing their chips on this big villain plotline, because they're still, I think, hoping to build to that. But I think reception and viewership for Ahsoka not being quite as high as Mandalorian season 1 and 2, I think they're just trying to get back to that excitement for this universe. So I think for me personally, I think it's a post-credit scene we see Thrawn, and I think they're hoping and banking on people loving this film and being interested enough that they start looking up who Thrawn is, and then the numbers from for Ahsoka and Mandalorian season 3 start to boost. I think one of the things that hurt season 3 of Mandalorian just purely is the fact that a lot of people didn't really like it that much, and so those people who were thinking, "Ah, do I need to watch it?" They decided I'm not going to, and those other people who were like, "Ah, I didn't see Book of Boba Fett, and I have no idea what's going on," they decided not to catch up. So I do think there are a lot of people who will find this a refreshing change of pace and find this a good entry point. I think this will be as bare bones as possible. It's like if you haven't even seen Mandalorian season 1 or 2, you won't have a problem watching this. This is going to be completely fresh start. Now, hopefully, that doesn't mean redoing a lot of things that we've already done in the first 3 seasons. Hopefully, it doesn't mean like reintroducing all the characters, but we're going to have some type of small reintroduction to the big ones like Bo Katan or the Armorer or Din and Grogu. We're going to have those moments. Grief Karga won't be in this, but like what's going on with the rest of that planet on Navarro? He lives on Navarro at the end of this. How does that all play out? I think there will be nice like homages and references to different types of characters like that, but we're not going to be bogged down by ultimately the storytelling of the Mandalorian. So as for that question, I don't think it's going to be completionist heavy. And as for this package, I agree. It's an exciting package. I think the most exciting thing is it feels cinematic, especially in a lot of these action sequences. Feels like they're trying things they wouldn't try on TV,
Oh,
especially in the
yeah.
volume. It feels like they're really pushing it. They have extra days to shoot, so they might be trying things on the volume that they've never tried before. They're trying different. They might have 5 days to shoot an action sequence instead of 2 days to shoot an action sequence, and it seems like you're getting those bigger, more grandiose sequences, like just some of the tracking shots that you see in the snow with the ATRT. Those types of things I think it just looks really good. For them to basically be shooting for like a month or less and have this stuff that looks this good already definitely gets me more hyped than I have been for this film. But ultimately, I kind of feel the same way as Skeleton Crew. It's like I don't have that high expectations for this. I'm hoping it's maybe as good as Mandalorian season 1, and if it is, great. I can't wait to see more. But I think the thing they really have to nail is that transition from TV to film and
Right.
convince the audience, right? They're already paying for Disney Plus. Convince them why they should go to the movie theater to see Mandalorian on the big screen and not care or worry about having him as a TV character now. Why is he big screen worthy? And I think that will mostly play in the effects, in the action, and in the type of storytelling they do. Like I think this has to be an important story even if it is smaller scale like Mandalorian season 1 and 2. They have to have some consequences. Can't just be greatest hits. It's got to have some actual stuff that contributes to the overall narrative. And I think uh, one of the things that obviously this trailer showed is that the Empire is still going to be the main antagonist. And I think that's an important one too, because you have that iconography on there. It's going to be exciting to see. I love seeing snowtroopers too. We haven't seen snowtroopers in so long. I'm
Such an
excited
iconic
to see
design.
snowtroopers. What'd you say? Sorry.
Such an iconic design. Always
Yeah, it
makes
is.
that beginning of episode 5 just, like, hit so hard when you see them. Because I mean, I love, like, the skeletal design of this troopers, the
Hmm.
stormtroopers in A New Hope, but they were handmade. They were some of them did not look as good as the others, but there's something about, like, Kirshner's perfectionism that seeps throughout the film that they just covered up that one area, the bottom half of the helmet, that was always the one thing that you're like, "That doesn't look perfect, right?" And then it
Yeah,
somehow looks even scarier. It definitely is reminiscent of, like, you know, flame troopers of, like, World War II and all that, and, like, there's some very villainous iconography in general for the Empire, but I feel like people just don't give snowtroopers the day or time that they deserve, right? And it feels like this is a great opportunity for modern fans to remember that Empire Strikes Back is as good as you remember. Let's bring back one visual aspect of that.
absolutely. So yeah, I can't wait to see it. Hopefully, you guys are all excited for it as well. But now we'll get into your questions and your comments and anything you would like to discuss. Again, this is an ask us anything question and answer type of format. So send in any questions or comments you have into the chat, and we'll go over all of them. Willing or barring anything that we can deem to not be show worthy, but pretty much anything you can ask us. So send it into the chat and we will get to it as soon as we can. Again, super chat is the way to bump up your chat to the top. It is first come, first serve. So if you want to make sure you get a chat featured on the show, send in a super chat. Greatly helps the channel, and you will get bumped up to the top. Also, if you haven't liked the video, we do have more people watching than have liked the video. Make sure you like the video. It really helps us out with the algorithm. All right. Back to your guys' chat. And we have Anthony who's joining us again and recently a member. So thank you so much, Anthony, for joining the memberships and for joining us every week on these streams. Anthony says, "Hi guys, hope you had a good week off. Uh, why don't you guys just go live every other week? It would seem to me to be easier." Well, we tried to just keep consistency, to be honest, Anthony, with especially with the YouTube algorithm. If we don't go live every week, YouTube won't
Yeah.
recommend us to you guys. So, outside of those people who join us every week and have this pencil in on their calendar, we have a lot less likely chance of finding new people to join the stream if we're not consistent. So we try to be as consistent as possible, really only taking weeks off when there's either a holiday or something important has come up. And we figured last week could be a decent time to take off. I was out of town again, and then we knew there was going to be no news as we built up to D23. So we figured might as well take that one off, and then we'll be back here. So we don't really have any plans to take another week off anytime soon. We might have different days. I think in these off periods, we might schedule different days to go live. It might not always be Tuesdays. It could be Wednesday or Thursday or whatever. And again, as every week I ask this because obviously our attendance we knew it would drop from the acolyte to now, but it has dropped more than I was expecting, or I think we were both expecting. So if there's a day that's better for you guys, even watching on replay, if there's a day that's better than Tuesday nights. Tuesday nights was the day that most of you voted on prior to the acolyte, so we tried to keep that same time and same format. But if there's a day that's better, or an earlier time works better, or a later time works better, let us know because we want to accommodate as many of you as possible. This is really more so for you guys than for us doing these streams. It's for us to interact with all of you. So we don't really want to do a stream that nobody shows up to because we want to talk to you guys. So let us know in the comments what you guys think, if you have a day that's better or time that's better, and we can try to accommodate that, based on our schedules as well. But to your next question, says I recently been catching up with the High Republic comics, specifically the High Republic 2021 comics, so the Phase One ones. I have really come to like Markion Rowe. He is no Vader, but he is extremely intimidating and skillful for a guy who can't use the Force. One of the theories that has been in the back of my mind since High Republic Initiative began is if the Nile or Rowe being manipulated by the Sith, either direct or indirect. But what would you guys think? Well, thanks for your comment, Anthony. I personally don't want to see that. I like how unique Markion Rowe has been. If you read Phase 2 without spoiling anything for Phase 2, Markion's ancestral line has roots into different cults and different groups that really despise the way the Jedi use the Force. And so I think it would kind of go against everything he believes to team up with the Sith, knowingly at least. If he teamed up unknowingly, then maybe. But I still like the idea of the Sith being in the background until the time of Plagueis. That timeline has been pushed up now with the Acolyte, but I do think Plagueis being the one to kind of make that ultimate reveal, the machinations start to fully unfold as we approach Palpatine joining, is much preferable to me rather than having the Sith really be manipulating galactic events for 1,000 years. I like the fact that they build towards their ultimate goal, and certain special ones kind of take on that power. So personally, I don't really want to see that, but I'm glad you're enjoying the books. And Markion is certainly one of my favorite villains to come out of Star Wars in a long time, a favorite original villains, especially for literature. So I'm glad you're enjoying his appearances.
Yeah, I would say for the High Republic Phase 1 comics, they're, like, essential, honestly. I know that a lot of the High Republic has been very much top down, like, it's adult novels, then it's the young adult, then it's the junior reader middle school novels, and then on that same, like, lane, same level, you could say comics, but sometimes it really depends on which series you're reading, like, for the Marvel ones, usually I would say it's closer to the young adult novels in terms of importance. But sometimes, like a lot of the spin-offs that we've been getting in phase three, they do fall like a little under junior novel where it's like you're not really gonna need to know them, right? They're like the High Republic Adventures. Really fun, especially phase ones is very underrated, but it's not essential to the grander lore plot. It's kind of more of just like seeing new characters deal with like the same situations that we have more notable characters and events deal with, right? So, but I will say High Republic Phase 1 absolutely is essential. Avar Chris is in it, right? And she is pretty important to the story of Phase 1, if not all of the High Republic, right? I still think it was a bit of a mistake to have dropped her into the comic medium and not at least have recapped what she was doing there. That's something that Phase 3 has kind of done a little bit more between the young adult novels and the adult novels, where they're like, okay, this might be feel like a lot of exposition that you don't need, but if you haven't read that, we're going to make sure you need to know all the details there, right? And that's something phase one really didn't get. They thought that maybe because it was COVID, maybe because everyone was home, that they'd be like, oh yeah, they're just going to jump into everything full completionist. I mean, sure, plenty of us did, but plenty of us did not keep up after we switched to phase two, going back in time and then coming back to that cliffhanger of phase one with phase three starting off 3 years later almost, right? So yeah, it is a really strange comic in that sense, but there's so much to do with the Drengir. There's so much to do with Avar that leads into Fallen Star. But if you just want to read it for fun, for anybody in the chat, anyone seeing this on replay, Keeve Trennis is a very underrated High Republic character. The psychology of what she's dealing with, the weight of what's going on with her and the Jedi, and usually getting the brunt of the worst things happening in phase one, especially. It's really fascinating to see how she still is a Jedi. She still is trying to be the best she can, and I'm a fan of that. And I think that possibility of her becoming Trennis of one of the Lost 20 that we see that Dooku is part of in Attack of the Clones, those 20 Jedi that have left the Order, most notably. Yeah, I mean, that is what this feels like our story is going into. Not sure if we're quite there yet, but we have two main series for phase three with Keep Trennis. One just finished. One is going about to start Fear of the Jedi starting next year. And maybe that will really push her to become a bit more important to the larger narrative of the High Republic and get some cameos in the books or something. But she's a fun character, so definitely glad that you're jumping into those comics.
Next, Anthony also says, I've recently been reading through Darth Plagueis and really like it. One of the things that kind of made me dislike Plagueis, though, is the fact that he seems to hate the ancient Sith. He even seems to despise Vitiate, even though he lived for 1,000 years, nearly took over the entire galaxy, and was more powerful than Plagueis could ever be. I think Plagueis is too ignorant. Okay. So as for that, I think that's kind of the point, right? Like one of the big things for George Lucas was that the Sith could never unite because they hate each other. They always want to be the top dog. They always want the other ones to fail. They constantly want to keep rising through the ranks and constantly beating the other ones. And there could be no unity, really. I think when you read a lot of dark side books, even Bane has a reverence for who came before him, but he thinks that they did it in the wrong way. And I think with Plagueis as well, you see he is the one that ultimately leads to the Jedi's downfall. He's the one that has a lot of the early plans that Palpatine takes over and improves. And so a disdain for those who came in the past, I don't think is something that's that surprising for Darth Plagueis. It is something that drives and motivates him to be better at that competition. It's not healthy competition, but it is competition within the Sith that ultimately drives them to want to be better than the previous Sith. And it's why an apprentice always succeeds the master. It's the reason that if an apprentice can't kill the master, they're not worthy to become the next Sith Lord. So I think that's kind of the point for Darth Plagueis. But yes, part of Darth Plagueis's downfall too is, without spoiling the book, is his hubris. And as he starts to get older, especially Palpatine starts to manipulate that. So keep those two things in mind. He's obviously not supposed to be. He's not supposed to be a perfect character. It's his flaws that are interesting about him and how he manipulates his plans. So uh, I appreciate that you're reading the book, and I'm glad you're enjoying it.
Yeah, nothing I can add there. I will just say though that the start of Plagueis, that novel really does show a lot of who he is, his behavior towards Tenebris, eventually usurping him and how he does it, right? Like you can read the Tenebris way, it's not really essential, but what you get out of Plagueis, almost like why he's spending so long to even get to the point of like, will he, won't he, with Tenebris, that really does set up eventually why he does fall to Palpatine, why he allows himself to fall into that position. He doesn't operate the same way. He almost kind of is like, yeah, well, we can kind of move past it. And Tenebris also believes that too. Like, do we really need the rule of two? That's kind of just what we needed to survive because the Sith are like cancer, and once cancers all run into each other, they just try to eat each other alive and destroy each other in that process, right? So it's a pretty interesting way of looking at it that he still does adhere to it, but he isn't like reverent of it in the same way that a Palpatine ultimately is, that a lot of these older Sith are.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the other things too about Plagueis is he is high born as well. He's not
Yeah.
somebody who's born in having to scrounge for food and trying to live out his life. It's one of the things about Palpatine as well. They're both high born. Plagueis is born with lots of money and kind of the ability to do anything he wants. And so I think that's something that also plays into a bit of his hubris as well. Anthony also says one of the things that has been frustrating to me is people saying that Star Wars is dead, and also people blaming canon sequel fans for being dead, for it being dead, which is extremely offensive to a lot of people. That's Yeah, I mean that's just something that comes with the territory of being a Star Wars fan at this point. Nobody's going to agree on those types of things. Star Wars isn't dead, and it will never be dead. I think this is pretty much an indestructible franchise. Now, could it have lower periods, could have lulls, down periods. We're kind of seeing that right now, right? We're seeing a dip in quality overall for the most part. We're seeing Star Wars start to struggle with its identity and its direction as a franchise. We're starting to see Star Wars trying to experiment with things like Skeleton Crew or things like The Mandalorian and Grogu. What's their path? What's their direction? What's their future? And I think when people say Star Wars is dead, they're meaning it more like that, that it's rudderless. It doesn't have its direction right now, but they're trying to find it. And I think Star Wars fans and people around Star Wars, we love this franchise too much, as you can see by even the haters out there. Really, it people love it too much to ever not watch something, right? So they're going to watch it, and as long as people watch it, it's not dead. But I think they're trying to find their direction and they're searching for it. Every studio, when you make this much stuff, has problems. When we saw the infallible Marvel have a bad last 3 years, it's been they've been really struggling. Now, Deadpool and Wolverine, I don't think it's a great movie, but it's a really good movie, and it definitely certainly goes in a direction that is much more exciting, and it brings a lot of things that people really love. And so they're kind of starting to get back on track. If they have a great year next year, they're back on track as well. And we've seen Star Wars with these same ebbs and flows, right? People said Star Wars was dead after the prequels. And then the Clone Wars came out and they said Star Wars is even deader. And then slowly Clone Wars started to reclaim a lot of fans, and it built up the hype into The Force Awakens, which probably won't get touched for a long time as the domestic box office record holder. It's the only thing close to $1 billion in domestic box office. People obviously loved that film when it came out. And Star Wars had its next dip with The Last Jedi. Then The Mandalorian saved it, you know. So we keep seeing those trends. When you have a long running franchise, especially a franchise that puts out content every single year, you're going to see these ebbs and flows. Where we'd like it to be a much straighter line or higher peak than we've been getting recently, absolutely. But you just have to let some of those comments go through one ear and out the other. When you look at it logically, it's not dead, but it is trying to find its identity, its direction, and really its juggernaut of its franchise. What is the cash cow? Before it was The Mandalorian, now it's not really The Mandalorian. They think it might be again. That's why they're pushing this film. When that comes out, we'll really see, okay, what is the future of Star Wars? Because a lot of, like we've mentioned on this channel, a lot of the stuff they've announced as being like the big next 5 year, 6 year period of Star Wars has all come out or is coming out. So what's next? What's the future after this? And I think you're going to start to see that in the next couple of years. Probably, I would say by 2026. I think next year they'll kind of piggyback on a lot of stuff or make some smaller announcements in Japan, and then there will be no D23 next year, so maybe at Comic Con or something. But I think 26, when you get the release of the Mandalorian and Grogu, I would assume they have a general direction for what the next 5 years are going to be like. And I think stay tuned for that, because they're this is such a massive franchise. They are working as hard as possible to make it as good as possible, and we got to expect some bigger and better things coming here in the next few years.
Yeah, and I mean, let's be honest, guys. George Lucas killed Star Wars in 1999, right? Like, we've been hearing this sort of thing year after year since we were fans, as when the prequels are coming out, right? I'd say some of what you're hearing, like, we don't talk politics on this channel, but all of social media today is not the social media of 10 or 20 years ago. There's so many groups of interest that are trying to fight over that space that play a role in just creating opinions or creating narratives online that people fall for because it's promoting or leading into a pathway of whatever they're trying to ultimately get you hooked on. That is kind of how social media has become. We've taken it from simply being an addictive thing to being a thing that like everybody wants to use and weaponize, right? And it sucks, but that's one way you have to also look at Star Wars. You shouldn't really take much of Star Wars seriously. I mean, I feel like if you took everything about The Last Jedi seriously that people put online, like the 5 hours of Mark Hamill hating The Last Jedi and all these other things, yeah, why would Disney have even put out The Mandalorian and all these other shows, right? They would have been like, oh my God, we have to take 2 years off. Everyone hates us. But these are not representative of reality, right? And we're seeing that more and more, right? And it's interesting to bring up also like AI. People are like, oh, now these AI images are getting so good, like, will dating apps change and all this and that? It's like, yeah, we might actually have to go out in person and meet people again. It's pretty hilarious to think of it, but a lot of the internet as we kind of lived through the 2010s almost reached a peak there, and now it's kind of like losing some of its value because of just how much different groups have hemorrhaged it. And Star Wars is always a hotbed of controversy for anybody to jump on since the 80s, since the 90s, and it was very clearly used for that way in the period of the sequels. There were flaws of the sequels that you can call out storytelling wise. Not enough backstory, not enough differences to what's going on between this and the original trilogy. There's a lot of things you could talk about, but a lot of people's complaints that are still repeated again and again and again today, they're not really about the films themselves. They're just like what you've kind of submitted yourself to online. And if you're getting frustrated by that, Anthony, you're just getting what everyone else has been getting. You just need to understand that there are people like us who are just here to talk and enjoy and discuss Star Wars and be critical of it. Absolutely, but not get caught up in all that stuff and saying like Star Wars is over and all that. If we believe that, Star Wars would be dead every 3 months, right? Like that's just kind of how it is. And it's great to also parallel it to the MCU because frankly, since Iron Man, since the success of Captain America and Thor, that was the real first test of the MCU. It has become the juggernaut. It is the franchise of the world in a way that Star Wars is not. Like when Liam was bringing up the whole domestic box office of The Force Awakens, Star Wars is a very American franchise. China doesn't really love it because it wasn't there in the 70s and 80s, right? Japan loves it. It's different, right? But there's a lot of Asia that hasn't really explored it. A lot of South America that is hit or miss there. A lot of Europe, they kind of want a little more sci-fi as opposed to space fantasy. But the MCU, it's built off of comic book history. It's built off of centuries worth of stories essentially at this point. And once it kind of blew up, it became the franchise for the world. And yes, like Liam said, 3 years down the hill. But I will say the one thing that Disney, did same for Lucasfilm, same for Marvel, is that they pushed out way too many projects for the Disney Plus era once Iger first retired because they thought that's just what everyone wants. They wanted streaming. But we've clearly seen people are like, "We don't care about streaming." There are limitations to streaming. It's not just a movie on the screen split up in 8 episodes. That's not really working for a lot of people. Even shows like House of the Dragon, people have a lot of criticisms of the last season because 'cause they're like, "The final episode doesn't really end." It just is build up for season 3, and we have to wait 2 years for that, the new standard of it. So now in a strange way, we're going back to the whole concept of, like, movies being back in theaters. We wanna see the money spent on a 2-hour period of time and as full and rich as possible. Star Wars, unfortunately, even before Disney Plus, was so TV focused that we thought it'd be a more natural fit for that, and it has been. The MCU, it worked in the Netflix series, but they weren't really meant to really be super connected. Once they dumped a bunch of TV shows, what happened? Not all of them were great. Not a lot of people loved all of them. The CGI artists were stretched. There's so much about the 2020 conference that they put out that I think everyone looking back is like, "Why?" There were, like, too many projects that were announced. Some of them were just ideas that we never even got into, right? So, now that we're going back to movies, I really do think things will be better, and you can look at Marvel, Deadpool and Wolverine. We both liked it quite a bit. We're not gonna say it's the best thing ever for Marvel, but it's been marketed exactly right. What MCU used to do really well is once something big came out, the marketing for it was great, they'd immediately hook you on to the next thing, be like, "Okay, the threads are gonna fall up here. Here's a new character that you just saw in that film, now we're getting excited to put out this new project." What did Deadpool and Wolverine do? They had the advantage of using Comic-Con. Now we've got a whole new understanding of where we're gonna go in 2026 and 2027 with the new Avengers films. Now we're a little bit more hyped for Captain America 4, which a lot of people weren't for many, many months, right? It's the same thing that Star Wars really needs to do, but Star Wars, because it's been so TV focused, doesn't really have a movie slate other than what was announced in 2023. So once we start seeing those roll out, I really do think we'll get some real momentum again. I think we'll start to see shows that are more purposeful, that really explore a lot more of the Star Wars areas that have richer storytelling to provide, and we'll actually see a bit more of a balance again.
Yeah.
right now,
A
we're dealing with the consequences of it.
Right, and they've been very clear over at Disney recently in the last year, especially about their commitment to quality over quantity. People think that's an overnight thing. People think, "Oh, that's tomorrow. It's gonna be way better than it is today." It takes years, and we're still starting to just slowly see the things that have been implemented in Bob Iger's second reign, and I think you're starting to see big improvements from a lot of the things because you're starting to see the stuff that has been approved and made in that second reign start to slowly come out. And you'll start to see that even more for the next few years. And I think that's when we can really judge the direction that they're going in. A lot of the stuff was in that early streaming wars, greenlight everything kind of approach. And we'll start to see how that plays into the future. I think that quality over quantity approach is better every time. Now, you can still do tons of quantity if the quality is very high, right? Like MCU has proven that. They started with 1 film a year, they went to 2 films a year for a long time, and then they started going to 3 films a year, and they all worked because most of them were really good to great. And so, like, I think the first year they did 3 films, it was, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Spider-Man: Homecoming, and Thor: Ragnarok. Like, they committed to quality and they had it there, but when they started doing 3 films and 2 TV shows, then you started to see the quality dip. And so I think everybody can hit their limit, and I think Star Wars is still looking for what its baseline is, whether it is just 1 project a year, whether it's 2 projects a year, whether it's a TV show and a movie a year, or 1 movie and 2 TV shows a year. Star Wars can hit that quality and quantity in both high numbers, but I think they still have to find their exact direction, and they have to figure out, okay, where is this where is this going? And I think the more properties they have, the more places they can go, right? Like, that's the thing with Marvel is you don't have to put out the Avengers every year. With Star Wars, it feels like you have to put out the Avengers every year because it's been one big franchise centered around the same people. And so if you have Skeleton Crew as a franchise, Mandalorian as a franchise, The Acolyte as a franchise, uh, Boba Fett as a franchise, that's why they don't necessarily all need to be tied together. You just have all these different groups. You kind of leave it to those specific creators, and then ultimately you deliver products that are varying degrees of quality, varying tones, but also a little bit more streamlined so that hopefully could be better overall. And I think that's what we're starting to see maybe them trying to do is pick these specific pockets of Star Wars to really go for. And hopefully, with next year seems to be a very promising year for Star Wars, and 2026 hopefully will reignite that excitement for Star Wars film. So hopefully we're headed in that right direction. We've got about a 30-minute window here for the end of our stream. So if you still have more questions, send them in. If you have anything you'd like to send in via super chat to make sure it gets bumped up to the top, feel free to do so. Helps out the channel greatly. Other than that, we're going to keep going here until about an hour and a half, maybe a little over an hour and a half stream. Ovier says, "Hey guys, this is off topic. Sorry, but I know both of you went to film school. We did. I wanted to ask both of you, what films do you think are good for someone who wants to learn how to appreciate film? Thanks." Well, that's a great question, and one I really love. Um, it's also an extremely tough question because it kind of depends on your sensibilities, right? I think
Yeah.
for me, something that is a good gateway into cinema are stories that are based on true stories like biopics, war dramas, stuff like that, where you have kind of a basis to compare it to in real life. Something that kind of got me into film. And I think that's somewhere you can go that's always kind of safe, but relatively rewarding and usually pretty solid every time. Things like, Saving Private Ryan or Apocalypse Now or the what other classic biopics out there? And name a biopic, you probably could watch it. Um, I think those two things are certainly good for entries for people just looking to broaden the scope of their interests outside of like blockbusters, right? Um, but of course, you if you have a specific love or interest like sci-fi, like fantasy, like horror, like thriller, there's so many avenues you can go and there's so many different great entry points for each genre that I think you really have to find what it is you specifically like about film and about storytelling, and you then dive in from there. You know, what I did when I first started getting into film in like seventh, eighth grade, really watching everything I could, is just look up people's lists of like the top 100 movies of all time, start checking those off, seeing which ones of those movies that are common on a lot of people's lists, watch them. And then if you really like that, watch more of those types of movies. Like, you know, we watch The Godfather if it's listed as number one on almost every list. Watch The Godfather 2, then watch Goodfellas, then watch Mean Streets. You know, you can keep going down in a variety of different ways into each genre, specifically based on what people recommend as the best places to go. But yeah, uh, I don't really have like a hard and fast favorite movies of all time list. Star Wars is my favorite, just the franchise, and Lord of the Rings would be my second favorite. After that, I would definitely say The Godfather is a must. Apocalypse Now for me is my favorite war film. The Shining is my favorite horror film. Um, Pulp Fiction, I think, is a must. One of the best screenplays I think ever written. I'm gonna try to think of more while Sonic talks, but yeah, there's so many directions you can go. It's a very tough question to ask, but I appreciate your question.
Yeah, this is one I've actually thought about quite a bit. Like, I think after this many years of really diving into film and really I don't think I was into film as much as Liam was per se. I was, always cognizant of it, but then it was my senior year class in high school that I got to actually sit down and watch cinema, right? Not just like the movies that everyone hypes up and talks about and then it's like gone out of sight after 2 months. I think that's really where it started, and, my teacher, looking back, he had some great picks. I still think about, like, a movie like The Thin Red Line, which is a war film, but it's not a war film in the same sense that Saving Private Ryan is. You can look at Saving Private Ryan as a pretty standard affair with some great tropes kind of personified, some great technical levels of especially with the D-Day landing and everything, right? But Thin Red Line, it's like, okay, well, what if we look at the Pacific frontier and not the Pacific, yeah, the Pacific frontier, and then look at the storytelling through more of a visual angle, look at it through more like a poetic angle, look at like these little vignettes of stories of people who go to the war, some who don't come back, what's affecting them back home. It's different than just like here's a battle or we're gonna lay it out for you, right? And that's what it's a film that it's also based off of a book and it's still adapted very differently from the book. So that was one that really like pushed me to be like, oh man, right? Movies, right? Like I really like movies like that. Um, but I mean, I think when we talk about Star Wars, we don't talk about Star Wars just because they're fun, like pop culture films in the same way like a MCU film is. I think some of the original Star Wars films are incredible on almost every level, right? And that's where The Empire Strikes Back to this day, I think, is a film that I would tell people really sit down by yourself and watch it, right? If you pay attention to it, you'll see that there's not really many flaws to it despite it having a heavy use of puppetry, despite it being all practical effects and all that. It is a very thoughtful film. Like even where Boba Fett is shooting at Luke, right? You can look in the frame before he snaps his head and notices Luke and walks back. That's not something that like a lot of direction today would really capture, right? But I think that's what makes Empire Strikes Back a great example because it's a pre CGI film. Like, yes, it is at the forefront of special effects and all that. It's Star Wars, but it's one that's so grounded and is also in a very grounded universe that you get to see artists doing things with their hands and at the very best, right? Like, yeah, of course, there's gonna be some issues with it. It's just from 1980. No one's gonna deny that. But when you see it like really flowing, you'll see just how much the backdrops of so many different planets look great, right? A lot of it is matte paintings. You'll see a lot of the storytelling of the Dagobah cave really start hitting once you see how thematically it links up to the end of the film for him. You'll see how a storyline like not Luke, Leia and Han being just on the run, essentially like a mini The Last Jedi, where they're just running in a system, becomes one of the most like important places for character development and what you can do with time that's almost stalled, right? It's a story that functionally should not necessarily work, even if you don't really know the timeline of Luke's training. you can assume it's still significant, but then you have these two in this growing romance of like what 2 3 weeks, and yet you see it done so well, right? It's not like you're seeing them fall head over heels, but you're seeing the different things that push them closer together, the things that you realize like, oh man, once they're separated, why it hurts for them, right? It's a great film. It's a dark film, but it's so well done in that sense. So always, that's why I love The Empire Strikes Back over something like Revenge of the Sith, in my opinion, because as much as I love Revenge of the Sith, I don't think it really captures writing in the same way. I don't think it really captures practical set design. I don't think it really captures performances to the same incredible level of Empire Strikes Back. It's such a fun joyride, don't get me wrong, but it's very much built off of the backbones of what a lot of these older Star Wars films really established. But as far as other films, right? Kinda going on that same thread of, like, watch films that are practical, because then you'll actually start to see technical things that are really important to different genres, right? A great film that I would, implore people to watch is Heat, right? It's a film from Michael Mann. It's got Robert De Niro, it's got Al Pacino, right? The 2 greats of their time, right, in one of their later films, and you kinda see how you can write villains that are, like, almost noble, and you can see how you can really flesh them out to be characters. When people talk about, like, "Oh, a villain never really sees himself as a villain," this is a great example of that, and then you can see a hero that's, like, not so good, but ultimately is trying to do the right thing, but there's a lot of flaws to that, right? And that's what is really handled well in that story. But at a technical level, there's a shootout in that film that is still used for like gun safety and gun training in the military, right? That's how good it is. That's how accurate it is because Michael Mann is one of the directors who's known for his realism in films, and it's a thriller. It's so fun to follow. But then you'll see some beautiful poetic vistas, right? Just staring out to the ocean and all that. It is a film that you can appreciate even if you don't like violence. You can appreciate so many different things, and if it was made today, it'd probably be a premiere miniseries, right? Because there's so much packed in, like, 2.5 hours of that film that doesn't always work, but it's so well handled for what is the capability of 1994. Man, other films I would recommend. Oh, man, that's tough.
It's an impossible question.
It's tough. It really is tough. If you wanna just continue on that same technical path, I would say 2001: A Space Odyssey to see the master
Mhm.
at work there in the '60s, right? But I think another great one that I would recommend for sure is Tampopo. It is a Japanese film. It's a Western ramen and a ramen Western, which doesn't make any sense, but it is like a spaghetti Western, but you deal with the story centered around the plot of ramen. But then it's got so many little mini stories, so many strange characters, but it's just about a love of food. And you get to see how the story, while it has that underlying narrative of like we're trying to make the best ramen happen, there is still some really cool things that are explored, some very different genres. And it's a funny film. Sometimes I think when we think about great movies, we think they have to be serious, and that's one of the films where I'd say there's serious filmmaking, but it's not really a film that takes itself too serious. So, yeah, that one I definitely love. Ah, man, there's tough ones, tough ones. If you're
Well,
looking for acting, I would say There Will Be Blood. That is a fantastic showcase of acting. Just if you want to see people who don't necessarily do much with big explosions and all that, but you can see like tension build up, you can see people break apart, you can see time and explored. Yeah, that's a great film for sure, and some of the best performances of all time in film history.
I think it's such a difficult question over here. I know, um, we've tried to give you some lists here. Maybe drop in the comments if you're still here or if you left and you're gonna watch the rest on replay or something. Maybe drop in the comment some genres you really like, and we'll try to come up with some either a little later in the stream or for next stream. And as the news starts to kind of die down here for Star Wars, because we don't expect to have too much news here in the future, maybe we'll start bringing some topics like this to the weekly streams, and we can kind of talk about it and discuss with all of you guys. What's your favorite movies? Let us know. And then we can come a little more prepared with the list because it's so hard for me to think, outside of my favorites of all time. Like I have so many that I truly love, so many great movies. and I try to try to watch like almost a movie every night, you know, try to really just constantly consume. So it's hard to keep them all straight, but I want to give you the best list possible. So maybe drop in the comments or in the chat your favorite genres or maybe some direction you're interested in, and then we can try to give you a more precise list in a little bit. But we got a super chat from Toy Darian Dan, so thank you so much, Toy Darian Dan, for supporting the show. Says, hey guys, do you think that D23 was a bust for Star Wars because they're holding out for next year's Star Wars celebration? Well, that's a good question. I think it depends on, you know, what you mean by bust. If it is the fact that they didn't announce anything new, we pretty much only got stuff that we knew about. And really the only release to the public was a show that's coming out in a few months that really probably should have had a trailer already at this point. I can understand the disappointment around that, especially for those people who didn't get to see the leaked versions of Andor and Mandalorian, because most people didn't. So there feels like even less coming out of D23 for Star Wars. I wouldn't necessarily say it was a bust because Star Wars right now, like I said, it is trying to find its direction, and a lot of the stuff that's coming out is stuff we already know about. So I think next year is going to be similar though at Star Wars Celebration Japan. We kind of expect a little bit more about maybe animation over there. There's the rumors that they're already starting production soon on their next animated series, whatever that is. I think we could get an animation announcement, whatever the future of Star Wars Visions is, or maybe a spin-off anime. I think we'll get more stuff over there. It used to kind of be a hard and fast rule that overseas Star Wars celebrations didn't really announce anything because there was less people watching on stream, you know, less of the audience attending that were going to go see the movies like you would have in the United States, where it has bigger press and all of that. But Celebration Europe gave us a lot of huge announcements. Now, it
Yeah.
still remains to be seen how many of those actually come out. um,
Yeah.
but they gave us a lot of announcements, including that first Ahsoka trailer with Thrawn. So um, I think there's a possibility Celebration Japan is huge, but I don't necessarily think so. I think it's going to be 2026. It's going to be when they're promoting and pushing Mandalorian and Grogu, and then they're going to really say, here's our next future slate for Star Wars movies. And this is kind of what it's shaking out to be. When they announced Dave Filoni's Star Wars movie as well, he wasn't CCO. Now he has a much bigger role in the company. So is that movie even still happening? When is it happening? What's the future of Ahsoka season 2? We didn't know that when that was announced, you know. So there's a lot of changes since 2022 when they've announced a lot of things, and 2023. And so I don't see 2025 being that step. I think 2025 is the MCU reclamation year. I think it might be a push towards the future of Star Wars, but I think 26 is the Star Wars reclamation year because we're, you know, a lot of us, we haven't thought about this in a bit too, because we just had the 45th, but 2027 is the 50th anniversary of Star Wars, which is a massive anniversary, the golden anniversary of Star Wars. And so I would imagine a lot of the work they're doing now is to try to get the franchise on a specific direction and kind of back on track by 2027. So yeah, hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, I mirror a lot of the same thoughts that Liam has there. I do think it could be anime from Star Wars Celebration Japan. It's a great way to give it its own importance and still be tied culturally to what Star Wars' influence has been through Visions, has been on that Japanese audience, and to almost like give them a little bit of like a moment, especially with anime having become such an increasingly popular, if not the dominant form of animation that we see in the world, if not just TV shows at this point. So there's always been the hope that Visions actually leads to a proper anime. I know that will turn off some people who are older generations, but not us. We've been watching anime for a long time. I know Liam's definitely been more on the anime than me these past few years, but um, yeah, no, I mean, anime is wonderful. It's unfortunate that the realities of that industry is that they're super overworked and low pay, but they still make beautiful creations out of it. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised with the successes of like things like Attack on Titan, My Hero Academia, Naruto, these like more mainstream Western anime, right? Like that we see something like Star Wars being like, "Well, why not us? Why not us take a swing?" Right? Like a lot of 3D animation that we think of today, right, is still tied to Pixar and all that. But when it comes to television, I'd argue Star Wars made a bold decision under George Lucas to kind of become the face of 3D animation on our TV screens, right? So it wouldn't be surprising to me if Lucasfilm now is like, let's see if we can get like a big Western anime audience through the franchise of Star Wars, right? And that could be what Celebration is about. And I could definitely see because that becomes like that crown jewel, then they start talking about future endeavors with Star Wars animation, with the Clone Wars animation, right? Like Liam has that video of the Dark Times Clone Wars X show where we have different arcs. I feel like Clone Rebellion, Ventress with the Hidden Path and Quinlan Voss, maybe some early origin stories for things that are going on with like Darth Maul, with Crimson Dawn, and stuff like that, right? And I think that's still a show that's going to happen. I could totally see it be teased or like at least announced that it's in production. These shows, especially with the Star Wars animation that we know of today, are usually already being worked on right now, and then they get announced like just before season one's about to drop when they're like 2, 3 years into the pipeline because it takes a lot of time to make 3D assets. But I could see that. I could see Celebration Japan being the animation home, and then we could see, like Liam is saying, 2026, Mandalorian Grogu. It is that soft reset of having everyone be like, remember when we were all on board with Star Wars in the end of 2020 and we knew like all the story, like everyone was like back home. Let's get you guys back to that same feeling, build it up, and then yeah, the 50th anniversary, right? The direction of where Star Wars is going. I would see 2026 being so much more about the live action, so much more theatrical focus, so much more like different sub franchise. I think that is a big thing that Star Wars has, like, kinda struggled with is, like, can we just do these different projects and then flesh out the eras? Maybe not. Maybe you do have to have these almost, like, these groups and these stories that are positioned, and then you get to start off with different creative teams and push them around in different mediums, whichever is best for the characters, whichever is best for the story, and I think that's a way that theatrical could really expand and still be very different movie to movie, if they have almost like a set outline of like more story, more continuation, right? So yeah, I'd love to see something like that. If they really wanna get us riled up, they could be like, "Oh, we're remaking Star Wars for the 50th anniversary, another special edition of the original Star Wars," just like George
God.
Lucas. That probably won't happen, but I could see honestly with the 50th anniversary, if Disney really wants to, maybe like a very upscaled, really polished, really well restored version of the original cuts of the
Yeah.
original trilogy that people have been clamoring for because that's just a great way to get not just Star Wars fans interested, but people who are like very into film preservation, especially as we get further into a digital world and further away from the basis of Star Wars, right? So I maybe George Lucas would be the only one who'd hate that, but I think everyone wouldn't mind having more than the 2006 version of those cuts, right? So yeah, I think that could be the direction of 2026. But yeah, 2026 will be the bigger year. 2025, if anything, is the animation year.
And then to piggyback off of that, Anthony asks or says, "I really hope we get the Mandalorian Grogu movie trailer in the next few months." And I don't think we will, Anthony. Kind of like Sanak was describing when about the leaked version, it was maybe like a minute and a half, and a minute of it was old footage. So I don't think this is anything they're going to show anybody, similar to how they did this for Guardians of the Galaxy when it was announced at D23. They showed like the 2 weeks they had shot, and similar to how they just did it with Fantastic Four, where they hadn't even started shooting and they made a little package. It's stuff they never intend to really get out. I think it was just to get hype going and for people to know there's a Star Wars movie coming. We're working on one. This
Yeah,
is it. And I think D23 especially too is not just Star Wars fans, right? So I think it's an even bigger opportunity for Disney to say, "Hey, this is what we have going on in this franchise," because there might be, let's say, even 50% of the crowd aren't even Star Wars fans. They're Marvel fans or they're Disney fans or they're Pixar fans. And Star Wars is just kind of another thing that they're familiar with because it's at the parks, but they don't really watch it. This is an opportunity for them to be like, "Hey, this movie's coming out, and you might have seen Mandalorian in Star Wars Land, and he's getting his own movie coming soon. I think that's more of the attempt at D23. And so, as for the trailer release date, I I wonder. It makes me wonder if we will get a public trailer in 2025 in Japan. We're still, what, 8 months away or so from that. It would be a possibility because one thing we've lost kind of in the modern movie world is the art of the teaser.
Yeah.
Star Wars: The Force Awakens had a teaser trailer that came out in 2014, over a year before the movie came out, just to like let people know it was coming, start to build that hype. I could see them release like a minute or a minute and a half teaser for Mandalorian and Grogu publicly, since they've already shown some footage off um, early in 2025, even if it is over a year before the movie comes out. But I could also just see them say, "Hey, it's Star Wars Celebration. People are already excited for this movie here. We don't really need to show anything. Maybe a couple little clips or a couple things cut together for this audience only. And it's not going to come out." So we might not see a Mandalorian and Grogu trailer for a year and a half. So I don't get your hopes up for this one to come out, but I do think there's a slim possibility that they release a teaser next year at Celebration.
Yeah, and I mean, when you think about that teaser, right, a lot of it was just like shot and then
Yeah.
darkness, shot, darkness, right? We got us so hyped, right? Especially seeing Finn pop out of the sand, right? It was very much adrenaline, right? And like you said, that art of like marketing and teasers and buildup has been missing. Like I remember how much we got in the end of 2019, coming to 2020, right? Uh, over the months, really, until Mando season 2 finally released, right? And yes, we were in COVID, but they already had all that stuff prepared. You could say Obi-Wan sort of had it, but I felt like Obi-Wan's was always just like, here's a big dump, here's a big dump. Never like really having fun with it. It was just like, we're gonna put money behind it, but not necessarily the creativity. And I'd say the closest thing that we've gone back to that pre-pandemic like marketing that Disney was really good at is probably Acolyte. I think they've really pushed a lot of it. Obviously, the end product doesn't really justify that much marketing and the way it's been marketed. But I think that's a great like example of like, okay, well, we know we can go back to it. We know we can take the new advantages of like a lot of people on TikTok promoting stuff and all that. Like it's a good way of like evolving at once more instead of being stagnant. In the same way that they were starting to feel by the end of the sequels with Solo after that TLJ to the Rise of Skywalker run. So I think we're gonna see marketing really be fun again with Star Wars. I think if there's anything that you can look at the MCU side, especially with Ryan Reynolds and Deadpool and Wolverine, you can have a lot, sure, but you can make fun in your marketing and your teasers and your promotions and your tie-ins, right? That's what we used to have in the lead up to The Force Awakens. We don't have that again. The closest thing we had to that was Mando season 2, and I'm thinking the Acolyte is a strong step forward again, and we'll start seeing that really be fulfilled with the Mando movie.
Yeah, I think so too. And the Acolyte had a traditional teaser, but it was released like a month and a half before the show came out. So it was kind of strange how they did it like that. I mean, in general for shows, right? They haven't really released show trailers until like a month or two before the show comes out. It's been a little frustrating because, like you were saying, with Mandalorian, they did a lot of marketing for season 1 and 2 early. And then since then, it's like they've kind of taken that Netflix approach of like, we don't need to really market it, or let's market it at the last minute. I think they do need to start marketing things, especially a film, though it's completely different. So, film marketing, a lot of times for hype projects, you see them early, unless it's a franchise like the MCU where you're constantly seeing new products in that franchise coming out, reminding you of it. I wonder what their strategy is for Mandalorian and Grogu, because there won't be in 2026, there won't have been a Star Wars movie for 7 years. So uh, it is a franchise that ultimately has been away from the theaters for a long time, even though it doesn't feel like Star Wars has been missing because of all the shows. It's been away from the theaters for a long time. And
Yeah.
as a lot of these studios have seen, the theaters are still the place that get the most revenue generated and the most people to actively watch your thing, because it's something they have to choose to go to rather than sit on the couch and scroll through 70 million movies on your platform and just randomly pick the one you want them to pick. Um, they have to actively pick to go to a theater. So, yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see what their strategy is for that. So it is an hour and 30 minutes. How about, since we skipped last week, we could do like another 15 minutes. We'll go to hour 45 minutes and then we'll wrap it up. So Ovier says, I'm not really that excited for the Mandalorian movie. I don't know why. Maybe something is wrong with me, but it's a TV show turned into a movie. Nothing's wrong with you. I kind of feel the same way where I have a hard time getting hyped for this movie. Once the marketing starts to come out, I'm sure that will change. But I have a hard time having the same level of anticipation that I had for pretty much any of the other Star Wars movies that have ever come out. But I think that's natural considering the other Star Wars movies pretty much all featured characters we've grown up with or loved. So there's that extra nostalgia element or major gaps in between seeing these characters and it felt like they were returning for the first time. Maybe Solo is the only Star Wars movie that I haven't had this level of excitement for that I've known was coming out. But I still think there when the marketing ramps up over here, I do think we're all going to start to fall in love with this idea of this movie, and hopefully they really lean into those cinematic elements and make us see why it should be on the big screen.
Yeah, and there is still that strange lingering question of like, are we getting the movie as a kind of reduced version or condensed version of season 4? Because that has always been Favreau's biggest failing with The Mandalorian, with Book of Boba Fett. He's a writer for movies. He is a director for movies. His first experience with television is through Disney Plus, through The Mandalorian, and he had Filoni for those first 2 seasons. And Filoni obviously was balanced out with a lot of what Favreau could teach him from direction, from stage studying and all that, right? Once they were separated, you can kind of see the flaws in both. And Favreau's biggest thing is he can't write a story so far that we've seen with these characters that are a little bit more basic than perhaps the movie characters are and make it worth the full 7, 8 episodes of investment, right? That's where season 3 falters for me because as much as I like it, and I still think reordering some of the episodes really makes a difference there, he also shot himself in the foot by having some of the most important things with Mandalorian lore and most important things with Grogu happening in a different show that also undermines the most famous Mandalorian that we've had ever in Star Wars, right? So that's just to say that I'm not really a big fan of Book of Boba Fett, right, as a structured show. I like enough of what it does, especially in the first half with him, but yeah, I mean, you can see that he maybe was forced to, like, bring in the moneymaker a little bit more quickly because people were worried in the streaming boom of, like, how is Star Wars gonna survive in the streaming war without Grogu on your screens every year, right? Instead of keeping up with that ambitious end that he had at the end of season 2. I think once you see what we got out of Favreau and the MCU and all these other great films that he's made, and you combine that with his premiere episode of season 2 and how cinematic it is, how it's shot on IMAX cameras, and just the little teases that we got and kind of broke down for you guys here on the stream for the Mandalorian Grogu, I think he's gonna do really well here. I really do think he can make Grogu a character for once here, and at least give him some real agency outside of the few little clips that we were getting in Book of Boba Fett and parts of season 3 of Mando. I think Din Djarin, we're gonna get a lot more out of him. There has been rumors that Pedro Pascal did some time-sensitive shooting before he jumped into the Fantastic Four filming, so we could see the helmet off. We could see him really deal with, like, the weight of what he was doing in season 2 and then why he almost reverted a bit again in season 3 and actually have like, almost like a retcon version or perspective of what season 3 was like for us watching it last year, right? There's a lot of ways to not only make this a fun film, and bare bones and like a soft reboot or soft reset, but it's also a great way to just make the uneven parts of the storytelling done so far worthwhile again. And if it's fixed that way and you still make these threads that connect Ahsoka that get people excited for all these other shows, it doesn't close the door on a season 4, right? We might just have a smaller season 4 or something like that. We might have a Book of Boba Fett, like switcheroo where Boba is a little bit more of a lead here and taking over Mando season 4 or something. But there's a lot of ways to make this an exciting film in the structure of the Mandoverse instead of just simply looking at it as like a film that we're doing because we need to get Star Wars on a little bit of a lower budget, a little bit more of a risk-free option here for the cinemas, and still making these characters that have been our money makers for the last half decade even bigger, right? So I think that's me being optimistic, but I genuinely do think there's a lot of ways to focus on Favreau's strengths here, what we've seen so far, and the glimpses of new footage that can really cement this as like a not just a quick fix, but something that is ultimately a healing step towards the rest of this Mandoverse.
Anthony says, "What do you guys think of the Mass Effect video game trilogy? They are my most favorite video games of all time." I could tell, Anthony, with your Commander Shepard icon. Yeah, I think they're great. Even number three, I really did enjoy. Gameplay wise, it's the best, obviously, of the three. But then I did enjoy most of it. The ending is a little strange, but ultimately, I really liked all three of them. Mass Effect 2, though, is one of the great RPGs ever. I haven't played them in years, though. I played them when they came out. I think I started playing right as Mass Effect 2 came out. I didn't play number one when it came out. Then when Mass Effect 2 came out and everybody was talking about it, I played one, then played two, and then couldn't wait for three when it came out. So big fan of the games as well, but it's been a long time since I played them. So I want to do a replay. I know they had that PS5 edition that came out last year, that enhanced edition that people were talking about, or was it 2 years ago at this point? One of the years. So have to replay them one of these times. But yeah, they are great games.
I can't say anything because I've never played any of them. The one time I was really considering getting into it was when Andromeda came out, and people hated that game for pretty valid reasons. So
Yeah.
I'm, maybe one day gonna pick up. Maybe once there's rumors of a proper Mass Effect 4 or 5 or whatever the numbering will be that's in the works right now. So maybe that's when I'll jump into the franchise.
Yeah, man, that was too bad. Andromeda. I pre-ordered that game and I never finished it. It was so disappointing. But yeah, I'm glad you love those games. I could always tell you and appreciated them. So yeah, definitely something I want to replay soon. I'm kind of surprised. There were rumors forever about a Mass Effect movie or show, and we've gotten nothing really. So maybe one day, maybe that'll revive the franchise, kind of like Fallout has kind of reinvigorated the Fallout franchise. OVR says your guys' polls should add planets and ships and weapons. I have many ideas. We would do that if it kept the votes up. Really, that we kind of defaulted on this character. I've tried to switch the brackets around and do all these different things over the years, and it just never has had the interest that this has had, and really helped grow. Honestly, the channel. It's a big thing for us over there, consistent thing over there. So the characters are going to keep going for a long, long while. Might switch to some other things, but hey, maybe we could do some member exclusive polls or something that added a little bit more flavor back to the old days of it. Trent says, "Yo yo, hey Trent, how's it going?" Anthony also says, "Male default Commander Shepard is my favorite video game character besides Master Chief, Doomslayer, Kratos, and Starkiller." Those are all good choices. Out of those that you listed, Kratos by far is my favorite. Kratos, I love what they've done recently with the last two God of War games. They've been incredible. Such good storytelling and the Norse mythology stuff. I can't wait to see what they do here in the future with it. But I liked Kratos and I liked the original God of War games. They were very fun and cool and badass games. But these last two are like all-time great video games. So I can't wait to see more from that. But all great choices. Master Chief, of course, is great. And then Doomslayer. I didn't play any of the old Dooms, but I played the two newer ones and they were fantastic. So yeah, great characters.
Yeah. I'm glad you enjoy those characters. Not games I've actually really dived much into other than Star Killer, right? And I'm not the biggest Force Unleashed fan.
A lot of compliments on your mustache, Sanak, from Anthony Ovier.
Appreciate it, Trying to keep it groomed, Might screw around with my hair too. I never can be satisfied.
And I appreciate Ovier your comment about my haircut. I appreciate it. I think it does actually look pretty good. Skywalker's Academy says hello there. Hello there, Skywalker's Academy. Over says, "I wish the Acolyte had a better story. That time I just seems so amazing to me, and to start with that story kind of sucks." Yeah, it's disappointing. I think now that we're starting to get almost a month, it's crazy. We're almost a month removed from the Acolyte. Like it feels like it just kind of came out, but the time has been flying by, really, for me personally, and I can't believe it's almost been a month since the Acolyte. But yeah, now that we're about a month removed, I think the frustration and anger has certainly died down, but it's still really disappointing. I think that's never going to really go away until we get better stories in that time period. And hopefully, if they do a season two, that is one of them. Or if they go in other directions, which would be preferable to me. If they go in other directions, I think it's a time period that's obviously very ripe for awesome Star Wars stories.
Yeah, and I'm still fairly positive on it. It was a disappointment for me, but I mean, there's still things that I always love about every Star Wars project, basically. So yeah, I'm looking forward to a season two. I'd like it to be another season and the conclusion season of the story in there, but also maybe be a starting point for just like how Mandalorian was for all these other shows. Maybe this can branch out to other things with the Jedi, other things with the Sith, and can have their own mini series that are important for the High Republic era, the bridge between the Old Republic and the stories of the High Republic books, and then what we have with the prequels. Doesn't doesn't just have to be what we have here with this acolyte to be like, oh, everything's funneled into it from the High Republic books. There's a lot of things from those books that this story just doesn't have space for, yet I still want to see continue, and then I still think could continue well into the future and almost even touching into the prequels. So yeah, I'm gonna stay positive on it. I think the Acolyte is not the best version of the High Republic. That's quite clearly the books for sure. But it could just be a slight misstep that leads to much bigger possibilities. I'm seeing here that Anthony, your next thing was saying that it's there you liked it, but there were plenty of issues. Hope that a season two, if it happens, could be a lot better, like Star Trek Next Generations. Yeah, I mean, it took 2 seasons really for Next Generations to really get good. Everyone hated Wesley Crusher always solving the mystery or the big mission at the end of each episode. And then once the Borg plot and everything really kicks off, it becomes a show that people honestly prefer over the original series, right? So yeah, it's just the nature of streaming shows having less content, less hours instead of those 24, 25 episodes where you could grow the characters, grow the performances out. Will a season two not only work as almost like a conclusion to this acolyte story, but also be such a big step up? I'm not sure. I'm just looking for good next time. I'm looking for like really strong choices that all land as opposed to the weird editing. I mean, honestly, that's still my biggest issue of the show. It's just such a short cut show. It's such short episodes, and the editing does not help it.
Not at all. And I think, unfortunately, now, right, you have an uphill battle when you have a season two of the Acolyte. Like, you have to be great now, as opposed to if this show is just good, then the next season could be just good, or it could be a little better. And people will either stay on board or slowly get on board with this consistency and quality. But now, since it was so bad, I mean, you could argue the expectations are lowered to the point where more people will like it if it's just average next season. But I think you already have the uphill battle of people being angry about it online, to the point where it has to be great now to turn its name around, to really turn the project around into something that has significance in more of the unified fandom and less more of a just a vitriolic, polarizing piece of Star Wars, and that's a tough thing. It's going to be very difficult for them to reclaim that. I'm wondering if next celebration we get any hints about Acolyte season two, because I feel like if it's an announcement, they're gonna make it at a celebration, because it has the more positive force behind it to like push it forward, right? They're gonna have the people cheering no matter what. They're gonna have the press there talking about all things Star Wars. It's gonna be a more positive time rather than just releasing a press announcement, be like, yeah, we greenlit Acolyte season two and it's coming out in 2026. Then that's more likely to get negative feedback instantly. So we'll see what their plans are for that. I think it's something they're kind of holding off on until they figure out this full direction that they want to go in with Star Wars TV here for the
It
future.
it
But I
took
think that's going to
Ahsoka
have,
3 what is it, 3 months, I think, before we got an announcement for season 2,
yeah,
and it by all accounts was pretty beloved by a lot of the fandom, right? There's people who hate it that it's a completionist heavy show, but that's really the biggest criticism, or people are like, Thrawn is much better in the EU. That's really all people have complaints about. Maybe some stuff with Ahsoka and Sabine, but it's not vitriolic the same way Acolyte has been.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that's going to have to wrap up our stream tonight, everybody. We went a little longer than usual to try to get to all these questions. There were a lot of great ones tonight, so we really appreciate all that. But we'll be back again next week. Stay tuned for our announcement of when that is. And again, like I said at the beginning, we want to do these streams to interact with you guys. This is an Ask Us Anything Q&A format on top of the news that we already have. So we're doing this to interact with you guys. We love taking your questions and just talking to all of you, talking to our audience and our community. So if there's a day or a time or any specific part of the week that you want to see this show, let us know. We're happy to try to oblige as many of you as possible. This is a time that has worked for us and worked for you guys in the past, so we've been sticking to it, and we will probably continue this unless somebody tells us differently. But we want to, make this a show, especially as we get further and further away from Star Wars news, as it's probably going to start dying down here for another month or two until we get closer to Skeleton Crew. Let us know what you guys think, and then we will try to accommodate as many of you as possible. So let us know that in the comments or the chat. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. As always, make sure you hit that like button if you haven't already. Subscribe to the channel for more content. We do have a lot of videos in the pipeline that are coming, shorts every other day, and community polls twice a day, every day. Still happening on the channel, as well as our live stream weekly. So thank you so much for checking this live stream out. We hope you guys all had fun talking about Star Wars and a lot of the exciting things announced at D23. Keep an eye out for all the stuff coming soon. Thanks so much for watching, and we will see you all next time.